think it's working. You just never know with technology and things of that nature. I I don't think we're live on Instagram right now. That's not working. Okay, wait. I think I got that to work. But if you're not joining us live, that is okay. This will also be on the Christianity Without Compromise podcast feed. It'll be on YouTube, all the places. Also, if you do get to catch this on Instagram, I apologize for the awkward formatting. I get comments about this every single time. But YouTube is rectangular, horizontally, and then Instagram squishes us. So it might look weird on your Instagram. I am sorry. I have not figured out the way to make it all look beautiful on all the platforms. Maybe there is a way, but I hadn't figured that out. So I do want to really quick get to some of our awesome guests here, but I want to start with kind of laying the framework for what we're doing today. So first of all, the guy talking right now, I'm Jake Doberenz, host of the Christianity Without Compromise podcast. Everybody here today has been a former guest on the show, people I trust and like and think are really brilliant, far more brilliant than me, of course. That's why I'm going to let them do all the talking once I'm done here. But to lay the framework today, we're talking about labels. We are talking about the messiness we find ourselves in as believers, as Christians, trying to navigate this weird world where everybody wants to put us into boxes and things. And I am reminded, if we can time travel way back to pre-algebra in 7th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Beisel, she hammered into us this phrase. She would always say, label, label, label every number, number, number. Because you can't just have 45 as your answer to the story problem. Is it 45 bananas? Is it 45 cookies? There always has to be a label. There has to be something to contextualize all of this. But that's hard when it comes to being a Christian. When people ask me like, yeah, well, like what kind of Christian are you? You know, they're fishing for whatever kind of denomination I belong to, whatever stream of faith I belong to. And I don't know, maybe I'm rebellious and I just want to say Christian. That's all I want to say. Because it is a lengthy conversation to parse out exactly what I believe. Because sometimes these denominational shortcuts doesn't work, right? Because I don't fully agree with XYZ denomination and everything. So I don't want to just say, I'm one of them kind of thing. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Enough of me. Let's start with Kate. Who are you, Kate? What's your thing? This is also the time to talk about books and projects and all of that. And if you want, share a little bit about your faith journey over the years, as much as you want to share.
Yeah, well, I'm Kate Boyd. I am an author and podcaster and founder of an organization called the Remembered Table, where people who are sort of in this middle space and don't really know what their practice looks like right now have an opportunity to sort of in a space to explore that for themselves, especially if you don't feel comfortable in church right now. So it's a little bit more of spiritual formation in there, which is really fun. I have a book, An Untidy Faith, and I'm working on a new book project currently called Decentering David, but that will probably change. That's just the working title, about King David and telling his story a little bit more honestly than maybe some of us have been told before as we grew up. And as for my faith journey, I would say when I was really young, we went to sort of all sorts of churches. We've always been in the Christian tradition, a little bit of Methodist, a little bit of Disciples of Christ, a little bit of, Baptist and Bible churches. We eventually landed in Southern Baptist for a really long time. I would say my formative years were very Southern Baptist, like late elementary through college. And then my husband and I sort of found ourselves in Bible churches here in Dallas. That's a big thing, because Dallas Seminary is here, and that's sort of the home of that movement. And we stepped away from that more evangelical side of Christianity, 5-6 years ago, and we are now members of United Methodist Church. But like you were saying, Jake, we're not sort of doctrinally every single line lined up there, but we appreciate the community there. We appreciate what they do. And we really feel like it aligns with us and how we want to be as believers, as people who follow Jesus. So that's where we hang out and we love it there.
Well, thank you for sharing that story and a little bit about you, all that stuff. Kate has excellent things to say online, and excited for future book projects and all of that. Thanks for being on. Uh, Tiffany, who are you? What's your journey here?
Sure. Yes, so I am also an author. Before I became an author, I was a literature and writing professor. So um, I ended up getting into writing full time. And then part of that, I started exploring these questions of faith. And so I have 3 books out talking about either deconstruction or reconstruction, but they all tend to approach it from the angle of language, and that how does language work in the way we shape ideas, the way we are shaped by ideas, and the way we come to understand faith. And so I recently, 2004, completed like I went back to seminary and completed a degree in spiritual formation. So my latest book that just came out is actually looking at what spiritual formation looks like on the other side of deconstruction. So that's really what I'm interested in is how do you rebuild a faith that is your own rather than one you just inherited. And my background is I grew up in fundamentalism, but I also grew up just about 40 miles south of Washington, D.C. in the 90s. So it was fundamentalism laced with a whole lot of evangelicalism and rise of the Christian right and that sort of thing. So it's sort of this mishmash of the two, of fundamentalism and evangelicalism. But I really started questioning a lot of things, not necessarily the truth behind them, but the way I had been taught. The way I had been taught to read scripture, the way I've been taught to understand God, the way I had been taught to understand my role as a woman. And I started questioning those things around 2009, and I didn't really have a word for it because at that point, if you went online and looked for any of this, it was just people weren't talking about deconstruction. They were talking about backsliding and doubt. And so the language wasn't there. And so that put me into a panic spiral because that's what I'd always been taught. Doubt had been pathologized in my churches growing up. And so that was the route I went. And so eventually through years, I, found more people talking about these things, found the language for it. And that's why I take the approach that I do, because I realize that finding the terms for things gives us an ability to define them. It makes them less scary because suddenly they have boundaries and shapes and we know what to do with them. So now I am at a Disciples of Christ church, and I love it. And it's just been a fantastic spiritual journey, I guess, for myself and for my family. And I love watching my daughter grow up with a much bigger view of God than I ever had, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah, I love that. And you can already tell I got the language person here to help us with matters of language and labels. So we'll dive into that a little bit. Loren, you are this is the 3rd time on the show technically. So that is a privileged position. Only Joash Thomas has tied with you there. So that's awesome. Who are you? if people don't know, what's your deal, Loren?
Yeah, who am I? It's funny that how our paths are crossing here because I'm listening to Tiffany, mention that she's now attending a Disciples of Christ church, and Kate having at one point attended a Disciples of Christ church, now attending a UMC church. I'm ordained in the Disciples of Christ, but currently attend a United Methodist church and work currently as a hospital chaplain, have experience in several different denominational traditions and ministry. Grew up pretty conservative Baptist, again, would share, I think, many of the experiences that Kate and Tiffany share. And I think those challenges that they name are certainly challenges that I face myself, and challenges that I'm trying to navigate, I suppose, as I, hope to raise my children in the faith, but also not in an oppressive or too strict way, but to really give them the gift of faith.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren and I collaborate on a lot of stuff. We've even met IRL, as the kids say. I think
Yeah.
that's what the kids say. So it's awesome. Thanks for being on here today. He challenges me as somebody who has more so been on the main line, is a good partner on kind of that side and thinking about that. So real quickly about me, I mean, I've shared some of my story and things throughout several episodes, but just in case you haven't like pieced it all together, I grew up, cradle to college, in the Church of Christ, which I think is technically like that fundamentalist. Tiffany, I think that maybe that's the wider whatever category you'd call that. I don't know. Depends who you ask. It really depends who you ask. Also, they wouldn't say their denomination too, so that's a whole fun thing as well. And so that was just me forever and ever until trying to figure out some things after college. And these days, my wife and I are at a non-denominational community church that was not very long ago a Nazarene church. So they left that particular group. So we're transitioning there, finding out all this thing, what faith looks like. Church shopping, which is a crass term that I don't love, also not a fun activity to do, but I'm sure we all have little experiences there and the ups and downs. But let's get into the meat here. I'm not going to call on anybody now, so we can popcorn it. I think that's another thing some people say. Why do labels make Christians uncomfortable? Why are we having this conversation today about, again, the wide range of whatever kind of label here, denominational or some of these broader categories, or maybe even the word Christian? Talk through your experience or your observations here. Why do labels feel weird?
I can go. Something that I found, especially in the last, I don't know, half dozen years or so, is that whenever I said I was a Christian, I found myself wanting to follow it up with, but not that kind. And that's such an uncomfortable place to be. And I think we've probably all experienced that, because I'm seeing everyone sort of nodding, like there's that feeling of, I am proud of my faith and I love my faith, and I hate what people have made my faith into. And so there's that deep conflict there. And the first time I really noticed that I was doing that was when I was talking to a Muslim friend of mine. And I found myself saying, well, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind. And just realizing, why did I feel the need to put that qualifier on it? What does that say about me? What does that say about Christianity as it stands right now in America in the 21st century? And so I think that's where I find myself landing in this weird middle area of trying to figure it out. Is I don't know what term to use, because Christian has become so loaded and brings so many connotations with it. And I'm almost afraid that I'm going to be shutting people down or turning them off to anything I have to say because of associations that they have with that word Christian. That is heartbreaking in a way, because that's just so different from what it was ever supposed to be.
Yeah, that's so relatable. Here in Oklahoma, you say you're a Christian, and then that gives people permission to be like, well, our Lord and Savior Donald Trump, and then it's like, wait a second here, guys. You put a lot of assumptions into that when I said I'm a Christian. So, yeah, what else, guys? What do you think?
I was gonna say I think that's a big tendency, Tiffany. I also feel sort of the need, especially, I mean, I know you're in the South, I'm in Texas. There is a certain expectation. But I think the other side of that too is that labels do come with expectation, or labels have sometimes been weaponized against us too, or used to put us in a box to make us behave a certain way, to make us sit with certain standards or behaviors that maybe we now see were not so good. And so I think, having been burned by labels before, it becomes really hard to then want to label yourself. But at the same time, really wanting a label. I think that's what's hard too, is that labels bring such comfort. I know that, I spent the last few years going through some health things and getting diagnoses, and having them like put a label on it was so helpful to me. And I know that it's feels really weird in this messy middle, is what I always call it, the messy middle of this journey, where you're not really sure where you are. And then realizing that that's kind of the whole journey, is that you probably aren't ever sure where you are. And so then you sort of become more comfortable without a label. But I think that part of that is because of this, the expectation, the layering on of what it is it's supposed to mean when you have that label. I think sometimes the label even creates pressure of some kind. Like you were saying, Tiffany, I also feel extra pressure to even perform a very different kind of Christianity, even though I would say I came from a very performative Christianity, though my Christianity now would be more in alignment with who I am in that performance. To a certain degree, it is sort of an amplified version, because I feel like I have to overcome all of these stereotypes. So I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of expectation, and that can take a lot of different shapes. But that's something too that makes me sort of uncomfortable with labels. It's not that I don't want to be held to a standard or want to be accountable, but I want to make sure that, I at least get a say in some of those things that I'm being held accountable for, provided they're obviously not harmful to people. I think, we can get into that, but that there is a sense in which if there's a label I want to take on, I want to make sure I'm living up to it. And the way people have used labels I've chosen or labels I've inherited to limit me, or to put me in my place, I think some of that baggage carries over too.
It's interesting, I find myself in a place where, again, have ordination in one denomination, and I attend a church outside in another denomination that certainly creates some complications in one denomination, in the denomination I'm ordained in. I'm thinking about how society has changed so much in that generations ago, even perhaps our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, labels were institutional. So we attached our label, if we had anyone, based on our institution we were attached to. We were Methodist, we were Presbyterian, we were Nazarene, what have you. And now it seems like, because there's this drive for identity and authenticity, as Kate used the word, there's a performative nature to everything in life, where we're expected to perform an identity, perform a persona. So I think in many ways, like, resisting labels is a way of kind of opting out in some regards of the overarching culture of expectations of performance or behavioral living up to certain standards. So I think, certainly there are times where defining ourselves is helpful, but also I found that living without external labels, I think, is helpful as well.
So, I mean, what do you guys think? Should we just be Christians only? I mean, we talked about some of the good and the bad nature of labels. Maybe you guys could talk from your own experiences here. If somebody said, "Hey, are you a Christian?" or "Hey, what kind of church do you go to?" Like, how do you navigate those particular discussions? Do you use the labels, or do you tend toward the opt out? I'm a Christian, or maybe even I'm a Jesus follower. Maybe even the word Christian, has too much. Thoughts?
I get the question often when I'm in a hospital setting working with patients. Folks will often want to know, who are you, where are you from, what church you're from, and I try to be generic as possible. And partly I have the luxury of doing that, because in that context, like, my point and my purpose is to work within the context of the patient. So I'm wanting to be inclusive of their context, and not limit myself in a way that would put myself in the way of being able to serve them and minister to them. But I mean, my personal thought is, like, I think labels can get in the way of interacting with folks.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll say I've found myself tending to say more, oh, well, I attend First Christian Church, rather than giving myself a label, just saying where I worship. Because like Jake, you and I have a similar background growing up, and that particular faith tradition has a tendency to believe they are the only Christians. And
yeah, that's what they tell me.
Yeah. And so it's sort of awkward. And I have found in conversations with people who are still a part of that faith tradition, and I know still sort of hold to that belief, when people will say, well, where are you going to church now? Or whatever. And so I'll say, well, I'm attending Disciples of Christ Church, and I absolutely love it. And I always put that at the end, because I want to make it clear. And I realize this is speaking to other people in our faith, but I want to make it clear, like, to me, this is not an open discussion for you to convert me to tell me how I'm worshiping wrong, to convert me to whatever branch you're in. This is my way of saying, this is who I choose to worship with, and this is feeding my soul and nurturing where I am right now spiritually. And I hope that your church is doing the same. But I found that avoiding the label altogether and simply saying where I worship, at least in my mind, I'm trying to put my dedication to the faith, to Jesus, to the church universal above a brand. And so simply saying, like, this is where I'm worshiping at the moment, or this is where I'm worshiping, for me has been more comfortable than saying I am and then putting that label in, because of the expectations that do come with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I find myself in a lot of different circles, and not just in church circles, I mean, but in life and friendship and all of these things. And I'm not afraid of the label. I'll tell people I'm Christian. Or I'll just say I'm Jesus-y, like, I think there's a sense in which I hold that too, but it actually doesn't come up a lot. You know what I mean? Like, I think there is sort of this sense of people want the label so they can properly sort you into heretic, non-heretic, et cetera, et cetera. And, or if they should evangelize to you, or if they shouldn't, or where they should go. And the places I am and the people I'm with now, they're not busy trying to categorize me. They're busy trying to get to know me. And through that relationship, they learn all that they need to. And they earn the trust, and I earn their trust, even with the label of Christian. And I mean, all of my friends know I went to seminary. They know I write Bible books, they know those things. So if they have questions, they can bring it up, but I think I've sort of reached this place where we're very much more relationship forward with how we interact with people. And so I think partly it's me being less concerned with the label. So I'm not out there like feeling as though I have to put it out there first, or make sure everybody knows that I'm a Christian, because of that pressure to, again, perform a particular kind of Christianity, but also that it's that I'm not going to divide myself from them because of my label. And if they get to know me, they probably won't divide themselves from me either based on that. So I think it just I think there's a sense in which I try not to lead with that. In most conversations or relationships, I mean, it inevitably comes up when people ask me what I do and what kind of books I write. So I tend to have a lot of conversations, but it's in that context of getting to know rather than trying to sort. And I think that's where some of this tendency comes from, and especially here. I mean, I feel like there is a wide swath of Christianity. So even the label Christian covers a lot of territory.
Yeah.
And I think even people who consider themselves the only kinds of Christians are starting to understand that there are a lot of different kinds of people that call themselves Christians and aren't just like Christians who lost their way and, know that they're in a different bad camp. So I think there's a lot of, there's a lot going on even within the wider tradition and even what it looks like here versus what it looks like in the world. I mean, that's what I wrote my first book about, is how seeing the church around the world is what really kind of changed how I hold my faith, how I approach it, and even some of the things that I believe now. And I think it's really important that we widen that so that we understand the breadth of Christianity, but that we also then start to resist some of that like need to categorize who's right and who's wrong, who's in and who's out. And I think it's in that relational piece. So I actually find myself not having fraught conversations around labels as much anymore, because there are people who are more interested in me than the label. And I think that's really been an interesting shift, even in, the church circles that I'm in.
Yeah, I like that. And it should be leading with relationship. We are all complicated. I think back to when I did college ministry, when I was a college minister. And what question do you ask every college student? What's your major? And then you're like, oh, engineer? I now have assumptions about who you are. Oh, nursing? I now have assumptions on who you are. And I was always, reducing somebody to their major. And it's 100% dangerous to do that as Christians because, I mean, we're not going to go through all the things we disagree with our congregation about, but I'm sure there are some things here. But it's just so much easier to use a label and things like that. But leading with relationship changes that conversation for sure. I was going to say some of my answer to the question. I had a very awkward time more recently. When my wife and I were dating, we went to her church, her Southern Baptist church. And so for a while, the church I was attending was a Southern Baptist church, which did not jive with me theologically on a number of points. That's how I'm going to phrase it today. And it was really awkward because those conversations did come up. I am very involved in various nonprofit spaces that a lot of times intersect with faith. And so I feel like everybody's asking me, where do you go to church? Or how do you know this person? Well, I know them through church. Church comes up a lot in my spaces. So having to navigate that when I went to a church that I disagreed with, but that's just where I happened to attend, was a whole bag of craziness. But I try to avoid, maybe I'm not going to like hide what church I go to if somebody asks, but I never want to be reduced to that. Although I do, Tiffany, I like your phrase of I'm attending this. I mean, small, subtle changes in language can communicate something differently. People, I mean, that's the thing. People are going to have their own assumptions, right? They're going to assume whatever about me. I 100% know people think I'm a heretic. So maybe somebody thinks I'm right on everything. Probably not. I don't know. Like people can do their own thing, but we're just left sort of using the language the best we can and navigating all of these spaces to the best of our ability. Well, what I really want to know here, can't come up with all the answers, but like, what do we do going forward if we are in that, to use Kate's phrase, that kind of that messy space, that we have that untidy faith? If we're navigating something, maybe we use that phrase deconstruction, whatever kind of spot we land ourselves in where we don't feel at home, we don't feel like we fit in any of the boxes. What do you guys recommend? What are the mindset shifts? What are the practices? What are just some words of encouragement you want to give to people listening that are like, Jesus is cool, but like, where do I fit? Everything seems messy and I can't sign on 100% with anybody's statement of faith, kind of thing. Just solve all the world's problems real fast. That would be incredibly helpful if you could just do that in like 5 minutes.
I'd say for my own internal monologue, I guess for lack of a better term, I've really just, I mean, it would be weird for me to be like, hello, I'm a seeker. But I will say that for my own self and my own spiritual journey, I've tried to tried to embrace more the openness of language that I am seeking, because to me, growing up in a faith tradition that was about having the answer, and that having the answer meant never being shaken from that answer, which means that maybe you never grow in your faith, and that the thing you believed at 5, you still believe at 50. I mean, this is going to sound harsh, but I'm kind of embarrassed for you if that's the case, because what growth has happened in those intervening years. And so I've tried to embrace language, again, just like in putting for my own self-definition of openness, of I'm a seeker of truth, and that's capital T truth, or everything I do, I try to hold it up next to God's heart and say, does this reflect the heart of God? And so maybe that's a cop-out because it's avoiding those labels altogether. But to me, the avoidance of the labels is an essential part of that growth, because I don't want to be so rigid in my faith that I don't change if I'm presented with new evidence, or that I don't grow as my faith matures, or as God brings different people into my life and it changes my perspective and my sense of God gets bigger. And so just for my own personal, self-talk, I've really just started embracing the idea of seeking, the idea of just holding things up next to the heart of God, and just avoiding calling myself anything. As we've kind of talked about, sometimes we avoid those labels. But because that comes from a place of openness to see where God leads me, to see where the journey takes me. And to be willing to be surprised, to be open to wonder, which I think is so important, especially for people who have gone through the deconstruction process. A lot of people have a lot of cynicism. And so just opening yourself up to wonder can be an incredible antidote to that. And so how do you define yourself as a person who is open to things? And sometimes that is by simply saying, I'm a seeker, or I'm a follower of the way, or I'm doing a faith journey. I know that I'm spiritual but not religious has gotten a little bit cliched, but it can be helpful for people who are trying to figure out what that means.
Yeah. Similar to Tiffany, it depends on the context I'm in. I've started to some folks saying that I'm sort of a Christian mystic, which I don't know if I love that, but I don't know how else sometimes to say and, express my sort of similar to what Tiffany said, sort of interest in seeking after the way of God. My dog is attacking me right now for attention. But I think when I think about labels, I think it's important for folks to, I know when I was most obsessed with labels is when I was the least comfortable or secure in my own faith and beliefs. And I say that even when I was strongly using the word progressive Christian, when I felt most probably insecure in being who I believe what I believe, that I felt like I really had to proclaim who I was. And now that I've become more grounded and certain in my uncertainty, if that makes sense, that I'm just kind of like, you know what, this is who I am, and that makes sense for you. That's great. If it doesn't, okay.
Yeah, to jump off of that, I think one of the reasons we seek labels is because one of the reasons we avoid labels is because they come with expectations, but one of the reasons we seek them is also because they have expectations. They're sort of like the path now that we know to follow, the steps we know to take. So we're kind of looking for labels so that we know what to do next, so that we know we know what the expectation is, what we need to do to belong, what the next step is. Somebody will tell us what to do if we have the label, right? And I think sometimes that's what we're looking for, is the comfort of someone else making the decision about this, because this is so big and so hard, and there are so many variables, and you never know how you're doing, and that can be really, really tough. And so one thing that's been really helpful for me is to think of my faith as practice. I think because we want the label and expectation, we then think of it as, again, performance, or even like trying to be perfect, trying to check off the boxes. But it's really like, I think we practice our faith for a reason, that we have to sort of look at it as strengthening our muscles, getting those reps in, learning how to do things better. And so even when I miss, whatever expectation I have for myself or others have for me, I can, correct and move forward, because I'm practicing. I'm always practicing. And I think that's been really helpful. I think the other side of that is that a lot of people look for those expectations because they don't know who they are, and they don't know how God made them, and they don't know what their faith looks like, because they've inherited all of those expectations before. They still have that box in their mind, even if they don't recognize it. And I know that for me, learning more about myself and getting to know more of how I like to connect with God, how I'm wired to do things, and even just getting to know, I don't know, my personality is a little different now, because I'm not trying to like fit in a specific thing. The things that I'm passionate about, I can be bolder in. I think there's a lot of ways in which I now practice my faith um, that are different because I know myself better. And so I think that's another piece of this that a lot of people are trying to sometimes skip over, knowingly or unknowingly, in the process of looking for a label and a faith. And I think it's really important that we do the work to get to know ourselves and work on some of those healing things. And through that process, you learn to find wonder, and you learn to play and try on a bunch of different ways of connecting to God and other people within the boundaries of the Christian faith, wherever you might put that. And so I think those are sort of the things that I would suggest, is think of your faith as practice, and look more to yourself as the box than some outside validating thing, so that you can kind of feel a little bit more free to put things, in your box that fit, rather than, trying to envelop something else or fit into somebody else's expectation for what faith looks like.
You guys have great things to say. Appreciate all of that. My thought from this was just a reminder of church. We recently finished a study of Romans, which, what a book that. Anyway, that leave that alone. That's a whole thing that people can misuse. But one of the things that that was important to me in reading through Romans and all of this was the focus on unity, and it is unity through diversity. The whole thing is about, you got a bunch of different people right here in church. You got to play nice together. We're working out this thing called faith together, and that to me has been an encouragement to me, that I can be somebody in this church that disagrees with the person in the, well, we don't have pew, in the chair next to me. Like, that is okay. That is in fact something that's been going on since the first century early church. Is we got a bunch of people together that don't all see eye to eye. They got some different emphases, whether you want to call that strong or weak, like the language is used in there in Romans. But the point is, like, there's room for you, whoever you are, and you don't have to fully fit in the label. There's room for you. That has been a particular encouragement for me.
Jake, I want to jump onto that real quick, because I think you raised a really important point. Because unfortunately, I think a lot of us have been in churches where it was not okay to believe differently from the person sitting next to you. Sure. And that creates a tremendous amount of discomfort in people, which is why then to some degree we can struggle with those labels, because you're like, am I X if this person is that and I am not that? And so that's something that I think, unfortunately, somewhere along the way, Christianity really kind of lost, because Judaism is all about arguing, because it's in the tension between these different ideas that the truth comes out, right? And so they put such a high value on disagreement and discussion and argument and debating things. And Christianity somehow, at least as we have it in 21st century and 20th century West, for the last however many years, it has turned into Christianity means we all agree on all of this. And especially in certain faith traditions, if you don't agree on this one point, you are out. You are not part of the flock. And not all faith traditions are that strict, but we certainly know that some are. And I think that's something that to me is really sad that got lost in the Christian tradition, is that making deliberate space for the disagreement and saying in the end, we are still part of the same thing, even if we come to different conclusions. And so just having room for that in our churches rather than equating belonging with obedience, I think is so important, because those labels really cause us to question, like I said, if you're that and I'm not, then are we the same thing?
Yeah.
I'm thinking
one day, I'll go for it, Loren.
I was just going to say, I'm thinking like Tiffany certainly has been in this context with the disciples. Jake, I think the Church of Christ similar, myself similar, and the disciples. It seems like many Christian traditions now, especially non-denominationalism, even Baptist context, are technically like non-creedal, and I think creeds do a lot of work to use a phrase that way, in that they kind of like give us some structure without demanding ultimate adherence to our traditions. And so I think creeds do a lot of work in that they help us give some shape or some structure to the body without completely forcing 100% like think 100% alignment of kind of demanding absolute intellectual. I'm not saying it what I'm trying to say very well, but I think they kind of give some walls or structure without demanding
conformity.
Conformity. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, a lot of non-creedal traditions tend to be the ones that demand you agree with more specific things, right?
Right.
Versus like what you were saying, creedal traditions allow us to sort of have a wider boundary of what what right faith is, orthodoxy versus, having to agree. I remember in the churches I went to, like when you join the church and you go through the membership class and you like learn their doctrinal statement word for word, and you probably have to sign something at some point maybe that says that you agree with these things. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, again, my word of the night apparently is expectation. I think there's a lot of expectation and pressure that could be removed if we did sort of like zoom out and use more of like historical and even global ways of seeing ourselves as one church and not multiple denominations.
Yeah,
it's interesting, Jake. It's interesting thinking about Kate's example of a church with I can see it now on their website, and we've all seen it, like the long litany of
here's how to view Revelation. It has to be this way.
The Bible, you'll have a long statement about the Bible, and
goodness.
And certainly, like I believe strongly that ideas have consequences and theology has implications, but also I do wonder, like, if we're getting that into nitty-gritty, if we're somehow missing the point.
Oh, for sure. I hope to eventually do a solo episode on this podcast feed where I'm going to talk about some of my church shopping experience. Again, hate that term, but I mean, there's a reason I kind of use a capitalistic term there, because it kind of becomes like that. But what the place I found that seemed like a home was the one that had a little bit more of a broader view, because I am a guy that has a lot of convictions, and I've struggled in any kind of Christian employment context, churches. I'm not just going to sign something that's close enough. If I don't believe that, I'm not signing up for that. It has prevented me from a lot of different opportunities in my life, but that's who I am. I I can't just say, yeah, I guess I'll say I agree with your, view of premillennialism, whatever it might be. I'm not gonna do that. So yeah, I love where this conversation is just headed here in this last little bit. I think that was a really important thing to remember, especially where some people maybe are in that church search process, or just burned out by the church, or have all kinds of feelings about church. Um, it's good to remember that, one, there are some cool communities of Christians out there, by the way, and maybe what we need to start looking for is less of the check boxes and more of where's a place where we can kind of belong and kind of be ourselves and have our own little uniquenesses. So I know I appreciate being in those kind of spaces. Sure. Well, friends, any last thoughts here? Let's wrap this thing up. What do you want to say on this wild journey that we've started today? How do we end this thing?
I'd say for myself, ultimately, what I have come to realize is that the label that I'm most concerned about are the labels that other people will give me in terms of, is she kind? Is she a person of integrity? Is she a person who operates out of love? That if those labels are accurate to who I believe the gospel is calling me to be, then ultimately the other labels and wherever I land on that doesn't matter. Because if other people, if the world, if whoever you want, if anyone else is not seeing that reflected in me, then it doesn't matter what labels I use or don't use.
Love it. Love that so much. Any other closing thoughts, Loren? You got something?
I mean, I think what Tiffany said is great. I think I would say, like, similarly, like, this is going to sound kind of traditionalist, but God is our judge, and I think we want to strive to please God, not humans.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, echoing all of that, and also just, I think the comfort you need to find is the comfort of knowing yourself and living in integrity with that. And from there, it becomes a lot easier to be comfortable in the uncomfortableness of not having a label or not being certain. I think we do have to be grounded in something that we feel like we know, something that we feel like we can grasp onto. And so for some of that is convictions, but I think even that needs to come not from some external force, but from our own. And this is why I think deconstruction and reconstruction is so powerful, is because when you find, I feel like growing up, I always heard like that we need to take ownership of our faith. And then like when I did that, they were like, no, not like that. And so it was like, so I think part of it is, really taking ownership of your faith and understanding who you are and how God made you and what makes you come alive and the way that you connect and all those things. And I think if we are secure in who we are, it becomes a lot easier to be secure in what our relationship with God is and in those convictions that spiral out from there. And so that's usually, like, I think a lot of people will say, get to know God and let that be your validator. And I do think that is helpful, but I think sometimes we don't even know what our own standards are, what our own joy is, what our own personality or self, because we've sort of been locked into these spaces and these boxes for so long. And so I do think one of the ways we get to know God well is we get to know how God made us individually, and how we fit into the collective and how we support that. And so I have found that the work that actually has been the most healing and the work that has ultimately drawn me closer to God is getting to know myself and loving myself well. And then I'm able to carry that elsewhere. And so I am less concerned with what people label me. I don't even have a lot of labels that I put on myself. Because I feel like I know who I am. And so I'll use a lot of descriptors. Like I think we've been sort of dancing. That's what we've been saying. If people ask me how I interact with it, or I'll tell them about my practices or whatever, but it's less about like being rigid with what the label is, because I feel more confident and secure in who I am as a person who loves God, and as a child of God, made in the image of God, and all of those fancy theological things that, are important to who we are and identity. But I have to also believe that who I am is good, and I have to love who I am to really accept those identities, I think. And that's part of the puzzle that I wasn't really given before. And that's really what brought the picture to life for me personally.
Everybody has been so wise, and yes, you have, and you've given us a lot of good perspectives and things. Always like these roundtables. Again, this is something I do kind of quarterly-ish on Christianity Without Compromise. We are a podcast. We do a bunch of interviews, and then the last Tuesday of every month, unless we're having a roundtable, it's just me solo. A few people listen to that, but there's so many cool guests that are cooler than me and have great perspectives and things. Got a lot more things coming down the pipeline. We've had a great 2026, and before that, it's been awesome. And I just want to thank you guys. Thank you, Loren Richmond Jr. Like I said, third time on the show. Kate Boyd, second time. Tiffany Yecke Brooks. Your episode, it was rather recent compared to these other guys. Awesome. They have great works. They have great communities and things they're a part of. I'll throw some links in the show notes and all that fun stuff, so you can go follow all their Substacks. Actually, yes, everybody has a Substack here. And then, be fans of them on social media and all that jazz, because they're really great. And the conversation's not over. We didn't solve this in 52 minutes. There's more to be had. And I know all these people would love to be conversation partners with you in a variety of ways if you want to continue that. Or there's some other resources both on our show and these other guys have platforms, and Kate and Loren have their own podcasts and things too. So check out their things is the main thing I want to say. And whatever label you choose, we're glad you're here, glad you showed up, glad you have wrestled with some of this today. And hopefully you have found a place here in the Christianity Without Compromise community, and the wider church community as well, where you can kind of be yourself, whatever labels you choose. So thank you, everybody. Kate, Tiffany, Loren, you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
Fans.